Welcome into Sportsmemo's Betting Podcast, Week 2, College Football, Every Game on the Board podcast, and we're leading off with Robbie Veno breaking down the Week 2 card. Robbie, welcome in. How you feeling?
I am great today, Drew. How about yourself?
I'm feeling good, man. You can follow Robbie on Twitter at RobVenoSports. We're talking Friday's games, and we're going to be going 301, 302, all the way through the end of the college football card. This is every game on the board. We'll be doing it each and every week of the college football season on sportsmemo.com. Just hit the podcast tab. That's where you can find us. You can also get us on YouTube, Sportsmemo YouTube channel. We got 301, 302 here, Robbie. Wake Forest at Rice leading us off, and it looks like the Demon Deacons laying 19 on the road, 58.5 the total here.
Yeah, and Rice looked exceptionally good in their opener, Drew, against Army. What a surprise to see Army struggle late into the fourth quarter before they finally got that 14-7 win. But, listed as a huge 23.5-point favorite. Just didn't think that Rice defensively would be able to contain that triple option. But we saw in a couple instances this past weekend where if you have the entire spring and the entire summer to get ready for the option, even if you're Rice, I guess you can do it, because LSU certainly swarmed Georgia Southern's triple option, and LSU head coach Orgeron said that they started preparing in February. Same thing for Rice here, as they looked really good defensively. Not much on the offensive side of the football, only 10 first downs in that game. They're going to have to change that this week against Wake Forest, but I'm pretty impressed with them on the defensive side. Now we'll see if with only 1 week to get ready, they can get ready for the high-powered Wake Forest offense. Wake Forest, another really close game, right? They played Utah State, come from behind, get that victory late. Lots of offense in that game. I think one thing you take away from that contest, Drew, is the fact that Utah State really didn't go backwards with the coaching change here. Matt Wells to Gary Anderson. Utah State, Jordan Love looked really good. We saw a lot of Wake Forest money in that particular game. They don't get the cover, but Utah State throws for 416 yards. So Wake looks to have some defensive problems here. Both teams in that game. Utah State gets 596 total yards. And, I think that Rice is going to have a little bit more difficulty this week getting ready for Wake Forest, but I'm not ready to lay 19.5 yet with Wake Forest and that defense. Obviously, it's a step down in class when you go from Utah State and Jordan Love to the Rice offense. Certainly step down in class. Number probably is in a pretty good spot, Drew. I mean, my power ratings made this game Wake Forest 20. So we're right in the vicinity. Haven't made up my mind yet on this contest. We'll see. We got another day and a half or so to figure this one out.
In Robbie's second game up, we got 303-304, Marshall, Boise State. This is a fascinating matchup for Friday night. Going to be a lot of eyeballs on this game. 9 p.m. Eastern kick here. This on ESPN2. A lot of tickets written on this one, I would guess. We got 56.5 or 57 the total. And the Broncos playing at home in Albertsons Field there in Boise, Idaho, laying 12. And one of the biggest things I took away from week 1, Robbie, is the Boise State quarterback, just a freshman. He played very, very well in Tallahassee on the road, coming out with the victory. I'm guessing you could power rate him, with a drop at the quarterback position. But overall, I was very impressed with his play. We got the Marshall Thundering Herd. A lot of people really high on Marshall. So two kind of circled on, bet on teams in the sports bet spending marketplace, but they're head to head here. Do you think this number's about right with 12 at Boise State? I mean, I lean with the Broncos here at home.
It'll be interesting, Drew, to see how they come back from that, right? I mean, cross country to the Eastern time zone, play an early game. That game was moved up to 12 noon because of the weather situation, and they immediately find themselves down 31-13 and in comeback mode. Did they exhaust a ton of energy in that comeback? Certainly they did. They fly back home now. They get Marshall, a team they're favored against. Not sure that Marshall went out of their way to show very much against VMI. They collect 620 yards in a 56-17 route. I'm sure if you're Marshall all spring and all summer long, you've game planned for Boise State. You probably figured the VMI game we're going to win no matter what. We can stay a little bit vanilla. So there's some situational edges for the Marshall Thundering Herd here. However, going to that particular venue you can be a little bit awestruck, right? I mean, Marshall, if Boise comes out and scores right away, have to see how Marshall handles that being behind. But I do think that the situational stuff and the fact that Marshall has kind of gotten into a rhythm here with this faster-paced offense. Last week they run 82 plays against VMI and do well on the ground and through the air. So, they've got a veteran core there in Huntington. I would expect that they come to play here. It's a showcase game Friday night, as you mentioned off the top, 2 games on Friday night. A lot of eyeballs on it. So they're going to want to play well. I'm kind of hesitant to go ahead and lay points with Boise State because I just want to see how the freshman quarterback Bachmeier comes back off of the big win against Florida State. Not sure as of yet whether I'll get to the Marshall side, but right now I lean that way, Drew. I think that Marshall is good enough on both sides of the ball to cause a few problems for Boise State in what could end up being a very, very big and meaningful Group of 5 contest.
Robbie, we got those 2 games on Friday night, and then we got a full Saturday, September 7th slate. Starting off here, 11 a.m. Eastern kickoff. Early kick here, Ohio at Pittsburgh. Looks like the Panthers -5.5 at home. 54.5 the total as we got a MAC conference team traveling to play an ACC team. Tight spread here, though, just 5.5. You interested in getting involved here with Ohio and Pittsburgh, Robbie?
The Pittsburgh side, a little bit disappointing against Virginia. Now, I know a lot of us in the betting handicapping community like the Virginia squad, Bryce Perkins at quarterback coming into this season. For Pittsburgh being at home with new offensive coordinator Mark Whipple, who happens to be a favorite of mine, I thought that Kenny Pickett and company would do a better job moving the football, but it turned out to be a disastrous day for the offensive line. They couldn't open up any holes for the running game. They couldn't protect the quarterback. Virginia got home 4 times last week, loss of 28 yards and sacks for the Pitt Panthers, so they'll have to turn around and change that. They may be able to against Ohio U, certainly not the same type of defense as Virginia, either physically or I think personnel-wise. But Ohio State's such a veteran club. Nathan Rourke at quarterback is a scary deal for any team. He's the dual threat quarterback. Seems like he's been there for 5 or 6 years with the Bobcats. Certainly led a nice offensive effort first time out last week. I tend to lean toward Pittsburgh making a pretty good comeback here. Second game. It's their second one at home in a row. I like these teams that come back at home after a disappointing home loss. Question being, is the offensive line really as bad as it looked against Virginia, or did Virginia just make it look that bad? And these are the types of things, Drew, when we go from week 1 to week 2 that become difficult handicaps, because you can't just take what we saw in week 1 and run to the bank with it and assume that that's the way a team is going to play each and every week. To change in opponents, to step up in class, to step down in class, all types of things. Situational matchups really wind up showing us over the course of a lot of years in college football some crazy second week results, or results that wouldn't be expected. So while everybody's down on Pittsburgh right now, I'm not so sure I would be. I think Kenny Pickett and company could come back, and Whipple wants to throw the ball down the field. We'll see if he can be protected this week enough to get that passing game going.
Yeah, Robbie, good breakdown, and 2 well-coached teams going at it as well. So I think Pittsburgh does have a shot here at bouncing back. We got ODU at Virginia Tech up next. In-state rivalry here. -28.5, the Hokies laying in Lane Stadium. 56 the total. Robbie, I view this, man, the Monarchs, Old Dominion. They've invested a lot in their program. They got a nice home field there. I just think their head coach, Bobby Wilder, he's going to be shown the door sooner than later. And if you're into laying big numbers with favorites, I got this one circled. I think the Hokies roll here. Just talent disparity is pretty wide. So I like Virginia Tech. How do you read this one?
Well, I think it lines up this year, Drew. The talent disparity was wide last year. Virginia Tech walked into ODU as a 28.5-point favorite and walked out 632 yards allowed later, losing 49-35. Old Dominion up and down the field with that passing attack. Now, they've lost a ton from that passing game of last year. And you know Virginia Tech is chomping at the bit to get back at Old Dominion for what happened last year. For anybody who watched the game, and I had a stance in that particular contest, so I saw it. Old Dominion partied like it was the Super Bowl. Mm-hmm. After that, the crowd was crazy. Virginia Tech made mistakes late. Old Dominion didn't make any mistakes. That may all change here. A couple of things when you just look at the situational aspect of this game. It's a huge. I know revenge doesn't apply as much as it used to, but in this particular game, revenge applies. You can attach that to this contest. Virginia Tech has a ton of that in their corner, and Virginia Tech comes off of an ACC loss opening day to Boston College. Not really unexpected, going up to Chestnut Hill. I kind of thought Boston College was being shortchanged in the number. They proved that to be right. They win 35-28. So you got Virginia Tech off a loss, and you got Virginia Tech playing an in-state rival with revenge. And to top that, they're basically a cheaper price this year than they were last year when they played this game. Well, actually, it's bumped up to exactly the number now. It opened 26.5. As I mentioned earlier, they're 28.5 last year on the road. They're 28.5 now. Old Dominion way down. If Virginia Tech's ever going to roll, they're going to roll here. I agree with you. Not in the market of laying this type of price, but if you had to, this might not be a bad spot to do it in.
Good stuff, Robbie. He's Rob Veno at Rob Veno Sports on Twitter. I am Drew Martin on Twitter at Drew Martin Bets. Next game up, we got Conference USA versus the MAC, and we got UAB Blazers -8.5 or -9, 46 being the total here. Granted, this is up in Ohio against Akron, and Tom Arth, the new head coach, Akron was up against it in week 1. I personally feel, Robbie, they're going to be up against it again. UAB, the last MAC team they faced was in the Boca Bowl. I attended that game, and they absolutely beat down Northern Illinois. You could just tell the caliber of athlete was not very close there in terms of the defending Conference USA champions facing a very good MAC team, and Akron not on the same level as Northern Illinois in terms of program, but here they are catching 9 at home. Low total here, under 50, 46 being the prevailing total. What are you thinking here with the Zips and the Blazers?
Yeah, I think we could all, as bettors, be in agreement that Akron is going to have a difficult time this season. Boy, it pounded by Illinois last week, 42-3. Illinois, a lot of success with the transfer portal this year. Lovie Smith may have a deceptively good team. I know when we did the Big Ten preview this season, we rated Illinois toward the bottom of the barrel, and that's not to say it's a bad football team. I think that just speaks to the amount of good play that is in the Big Ten right now. But Alabama-Birmingham's the disappointment here. I mean, how can you be at home against FCS Alabama State, walk away barely escaping with your life 24-19, and along the way gain 114 yards through the air, a 3.8 per rush, and go 1 for 13 on third down conversions? I mean, it just doesn't make any sense to me that Alabama-Birmingham could have played as poorly as they did without seeing the football game, with only having the box score and the reports that followed to go on. That's about as shocking a result as I thought I saw in week 1. That's a 40-point favorite, Drew, that barely wins 24-19. Now, is it a sign of things to come? Was last year just a one-year wonder for UAB? We'll have to see. Akron's not necessarily the type of opponent that's going to expose anybody, but neither was Alabama State. So I think I have to stay away from this game and get a better read on UAB for the time being. I think we have a good read on Akron. It's going to take a while for them to get there. But boy, that Alabama-Birmingham result certainly has to leave everybody scratching their heads. 24-19 over Alabama State, which is not a good FCS team, by the way. For those who don't follow FCS, that's not one of your better FCS teams. So that's just a difficult result to swallow. I don't think I'll be involved in this game.
Yeah, that's why I love doing this podcast with you, Rob. Great point on the week one versus an FCS team, and an FCS team that isn't very good, because not all FCS teams are created equal. So watch and pump the brakes there on UAB. I hadn't bet it yet, but after listening to you, I'm likely not going to be on the Blazers on the road here. Good stuff there, Robbie. Next game up, still 12 noon Eastern kicks here. This is segment one with Rob Veno breaking down the top of the card here. We got Army at Michigan. This is a tricky handicap, Robbie. It's an interesting handicap, and we're seeing minus 23 to minus 22, depending where you're shopping. 47 being the total. I could see Michigan, pressing on the gas pedal and rolling them, just talking about, talent. But at the same time, it's a military academy, going to be fighting hard, playing hard. They didn't necessarily look good week one. However, they're catching 3 touchdowns here. Could they keep it close? Tricky handicap. What are you thinking?
Yeah, it's interesting because they're going to go at 2 different tempos, right? Army wants to slow it down, and Michigan, all we've heard about all preseason long and into the first game against Middle Tennessee was the new up-tempo offense at Michigan. It did produce 40 points against Middle Tennessee. Shea Patterson didn't look that great in that game. We'll see if he can look a little bit better against Army, but Army's certainly a better defensive team than Middle Tennessee is. So maybe week 1 to week 2, we'll see some improvement in the Michigan passing game, which, by the way, features some really talented wide receivers. So, for Shea Patterson not to get it going right off the bat, again, a little bit head-scratching, but I guess we do have to allow for some week 1 rust. I don't know that Michigan was looking ahead to Army, but perhaps they were. Maybe they took the spring and summer, seeing that week 2 triple option coming at them, seeing Army off the 70-14 bowl win, and figure we're going to roll past Middle Tennessee without Stock still at quarterback, and we'll get ready for this triple option. Michigan's got the athletes to do it. I think they're the better team here, Drew, but Army certainly is scary for sure. Again, I'll go back to that win against Rice. It was as unimpressive as it gets out of the Army cadets. They should have really run over Rice much more than they did. So the jury's out on them in week 2. If I had to play here, I think I would lean on Michigan in this contest. Again, a team that's in their second home game. First game wasn't that impressive, but I think the fans may get something a little better here. Total bet down from 48.5 to 47, which would indicate that bettors, Drew, think that Army's going to control the ball here. If they do, they're going to get under this number. But if Michigan forces 3 and outs because they're prepared for this triple option, then they might be able to score very, very quickly here. Army was untested by a Rice offense that doesn't have much. They'll be tested here by a trio of NFL-type wide receivers.
We got Vanderbilt at Purdue up next. Purdue laying a touchdown at home, 56 the total. Another great handicap here, Robbie, in projecting out into the season. I had this one circled as a bet on Vandy just because I could kind of projected them to get blown out by Georgia and then be a bet on in week 2 out of conference. But sure enough, Purdue goes on the road and loses to Nevada. I think we lose a little of that value I was hoping for, and the number now just sitting at an even 7. I haven't bet it yet, but looking for reasons to be on Vandy, mainly because of just Riley Neal, the quarterback position at Vandy with a tough-nosed defense under Mason. I think Vanderbilt could be underrated. However, how are you viewing this SEC Big Ten Week 2 matchup?
I think I like the total here, Drew. Purdue offensively with Rondale Moore, especially at home, is going to score their share of points. And Vandy really didn't show – and they showed a little bit of defensive improvement. Last year was not your typical Derek Mason defense at Vandy. First week for them to play Georgia. The physical aspect of Georgia on both sides of the football, certainly Purdue will not look the same to Vanderbilt. I expect them to increase 6 points scored that they had last week. I think Vandy's going to be able to move the football. Remember, they've got some really good skill position players. Now, the question mark, obviously, heading into the season was the quarterback position. No Kyle Shermer. Can they make up for that? Against Georgia, they didn't do it. Georgia's defense really swarmed Vandy all night long in that 30-6 loss. But I think Vandy will come alive with some points here. Remember, Nevada went with a freshman quarterback here last Friday or Thursday night as well. and sprung the comeback on Purdue, which was comfortably in the lead in that game, and then winds up losing the contest. So I think both of these offenses will get it going here. A little bit surprised to see the number come down, 57.5 opener, down to 56. I don't know that either of these teams defensively is capable of shutting the other side down. I'd look for some big plays here in both the running game and the passing game, and I think the number that we're looking at right now, 56s, but you can catch some 55.5s, which I would recommend. I think you're going to get over the total here.
Robbie, we got another Big Ten game here. Rutgers at Iowa, seeing 50 as the total. Hawkeyes laying 20.5. Those are the two main numbers I'm seeing in the marketplace right now. Rutgers, of course, ended the season, 5-0 ATS against the spread. Last year was, a lot of people had circled on as a lot of improvement here. Got kind of a scare there in the first half from UMass, but in the end prevailed. What are you thinking here, Rutgers versus Iowa?
Yeah, McLean Carter, the ex-Texas Tech quarterback, led the charge for Rutgers last week, performed very well. Rutgers throws for 348 yards against a Massachusetts team that really is down on both sides of the ball. Lost a ton of talent on the offensive side, lost their head coach, so they're implementing new systems and whatnot. So like you say, Drew, for them to be in that game in the first half really was a little bit head-scratching, but Rutgers comes through in the second half, outscores Massachusetts pretty strong in that second half. Now they got to go up against Iowa, who looked dominant against Miami of Ohio. It's a conference game, so it's a different type of matchup here for Rutgers. I don't know if Massachusetts prepares them for this. I'm not sure that Miami, Ohio is better than Rutgers is. So I think in both instances, you can make the case that, these teams might have a little something going against them. But in that instance, I would lean towards Iowa here. I just think defensively they can get after Rutgers. I know Rutgers is going to play hard. I know they've made strides defensively. But with Nate Stanley at quarterback now, it's not the same Iowa team that's incapable of putting points on the board. They can throw the football now as well as run it. We've seen a ton of Kirk Ferentz's offenses in the past where, it was kind of 3 yards in a cloud of dust. But with Stanley at quarterback, it's just not that way anymore. I think I'd lean toward Iowa a little bit, but laying 20, what do we got here? 20.5 is always risky with them. It's not a team that you like to go to the window with and bet when you're laying that type of price. All that being said, they're more capable this year of covering those types of numbers than they have been in the past. Last week, late 25.5, win by 24. So that's kind of what you're up against with Iowa. But I do think they're the superior team, and in a conference game, they'll be ready to play.
I was about to say a conference game here, Robbie, talking 317, 318, but of course not anymore. Syracuse and Maryland. We got the ACC versus the Big Ten. Maryland being at home, -258 the total, Robbie.
What do we make of a 79-0 win over Howard, Drew? I'm not sure what to do with that, but that's what Maryland did last week. 623 yards to 68. And that's a total demolition of an FCS team. Again, not a good FCS team and much more of a cakewalk than a preparation game for Syracuse. Certainly Howard doesn't do anything that's going to get you ready for Syracuse. I'm more impressed with what Syracuse did in their contest against Liberty. Hugh Freeze coaching out of a hospital bed. But Liberty can throw the football around. In fact, they're known for being able to throw the football around, and they got shut out by the Syracuse defense, which head coach Dino Babers has referred to as the strength of his team this year. And boy, they looked the part last week. The replacement, Tommy DeVito for Eric Dungy, wasn't great. 24 points scored against Liberty. I think Syracuse should be doing more than that. A lot of plays run in that game, 155 total plays, not a lot of yards gained in that contest. So, I don't know which one you weigh more. Is Liberty's defense improved to hold Syracuse the way they did, or is Syracuse's offense struggling with DeVito right now? This is a game where I'd like to probably bet both teams. I think that Mike Locksley has a lot going on at Maryland. They've got some hidden talent that, you just don't think about when you think of Maryland. But the quarterback play, remember the quarterback injuries that they've been through the last couple of years. And they're healthy at quarterback now and deep at quarterback now, and they're going to take advantage of all their parts. This is going to be a really good game. I lean a little bit towards Maryland because I like the skill athletes and I like the quarterback play. We'll see if their defense can keep Syracuse contained, but right now I lean towards Maryland.
Robbie, we got another 12 noon kickoff here. Loaded 12 noon early slate Eastern kickoffs here. 9 a.m. Pacific. We got West Virginia at Missouri. 62.5 being the total. Missouri, off of that week one shocker, laying 13.5 or 14, depending where you're shopping. What are you thinking here with WVU versus Mizzou?
Yeah, this is going to be tough for Missouri, a team that had aspirations of being 8-0 after their first 8 weeks and actually got off to a flying start against Wyoming, had 14 points on the board, and really, Drew, at that point in time, it looked like a physical mismatch. Missouri's much ballyhooed offensive line was just knocking Wyoming off the ball, and they were doing whatever they wanted to do. And then all of a sudden, the defense caved and maybe altitude kicked in, and Wyoming and Sean Chambers, which is a very much improved offense, started moving the football at will against them. Missouri tried to come back in the end, couldn't get there. Disappointing loss. If Missouri starts to lose ball games, I could see the season unraveling on them because there's no postseason aspirations to speak of. So this is an important game for the Missouri Tigers. On the other side of the coin, West Virginia, a team that the entire world is down on. Coaching change, Neil Brown, certainly a good coach and a good staff, but West Virginia minus some talent that Dana Holgorsen had when he was there. But they played it real good. I mean, James Madison is ranked by many as the number one FCS team in the country, and West Virginia wins that game 20-13, only as a 7-point favorite, so they push the number. They actually go in there and get outgained and still come up with the win. I think that this contest against Missouri is going to find them in a little bit of trouble here because Kelly Bryant and that Mizzou offense can do some things that James Madison doesn't. Missouri's defense not as good, but I don't know that West Virginia is ready to move the football yet. Like I say, last week, 294 yards at home, just not good enough. So I probably look to Missouri. I'm not thrilled with the price, though. 13.5 to me is excessive in this particular instance. I don't want with the West Virginia side, but I'm not sure I'm ready to lay it with Mizzou. If West Virginia can do any damage whatsoever on offense, the game should go over, but I'm not sure they can, Drew. So a lot of conflicting arguments on this game, at least for me, and I've sat out so far. I'll probably sit out as the week goes on.
We're talking with Robbie Veno, and last year, guys, his 5% blue chip totals 11-3. That's 79% last season. Short sample size, but still very, very good. And over the longer term, he's 134-84. That's 61.5%. So over the long term in college football, nailing the big plays. Check out Robbie Veno for his college football season package at sportsmemo.com. And he's also obviously knows his college football listening to him. He knows his NFL as well, and he's got his 5% NFL blue chip game of the week up at sportsmemo.com. Check it out right there. We got Cincinnati at Ohio State. Interesting matchup here in the state of Ohio. 53.5 being the total. Buckeyes laying minus 15.5 to minus 16.5. So some opinion in the marketplace in this one. This one in the big house. We got the Bearcats and Buckeyes. How are you viewing it, Robbie?
Towards Cincinnati here, Drew. They had a nice win over UCLA opening night, 24-14. Luke Fickell, obviously, the connection to Ohio State is there. The kids will be fired up for him. Ohio State defensively against Florida Atlantic last week looked real good. Offensively, sluggish at times, but good enough to get by. Still allowed 21 points in that game. I think it's a step up for them. Certainly it's a step up from FAU to Cincinnati. Numbers come down. I agree with the line movement here. I think Cincinnati plus the 15.5 that's available right now, or 16 points even in a lot of places. I think that's worth it here. I think Cincinnati defensively can get after Justin Fields. They're a better team than a lot of people think, and having that UCLA win under their belt and the extra time to prepare because they played on Thursday night, I think helps them a lot here.
We got Bowling Green, Kansas State up next. KSU minus 24 in Manhattan, 58.5 the total.
Yeah, not a ton to say here, Drew. I mean, it's hard to gauge what Kansas State is after defeating Nicholls State, but I will say that putting up 573 yards and 49 points is a pretty good sign. They did it on the ground, North Dakota State style. Obviously, that's the type of offense they're going to look like this year. With the coaching change, 361 yards on the ground is a lot. Played good defense, out first down Nicholls 33-11. I just don't know. What that represents in terms of how they'll play against Bowling Green. Same for Bowling Green. I mean, a pretty nice win over Morgan State. Never in doubt. 37-4 first down wise, 46-3. But both of these teams played very poor FCS teams, ran up some big numbers. I think we have to see them play head to head before we can get any real read on both of these squads.
We got Northern Illinois, the MAC team, traveling to the Pac-12, Salt Lake City to take on the Utah Utes. This is a rematch of last year's game. I remember it because I bet the Utes on the road as a favorite. They did not cover, did not look good. One of their worst games all season, then go on to, be one play away, one bad call away from winning the Pac-12. Now they're laying 21.5 at home, 43.5 the total, Robbie.
Yeah, they didn't get going last year, Drew, until the second half. At halftime, they're down 3-0. To Northern Illinois, and in the second half they win 17-3. But as you mentioned, that's not good enough to cover the 12.5 point number. Different teams this year, I think. Northern Illinois, however, exceeded expectations week one. They did beat a good FCS team, Illinois State, from the Missouri Valley Conference. They win 24-17 and cover. But I don't know that that's even close to being as impressive as what Utah's 30-12 win over BYU was. I mean, they just wore BYU out, and then in the second half pulled away. A couple of interceptions in that contest that led to points for Utah. Defensively, they're intimidating. Offensively, they push the other team around. I think BYU is a extremely physical football team, and I don't know that Northern Illinois has the same type of athletes. So if you can shut down BYU, I'd expect Utah to be able to shut down Northern Illinois again as they did last year. But this time I think there'll be a lot more points with it. I think Utah's going to roll in that game.
Robbie, we got last game for this segment. We got USF at Georgia Tech, 62 the total, -6.5 now, seeing Georgia Tech laying in Bobby Dodd Stadium there in Atlanta. Fascinating handicap, only a sports bettor could love. Two teams, I'll tell you, Robbie. Where is the floor for these two teams? It's tough to tell. Volatile handicap, I will say that. I'm not sure how to bet it, but part of me, the degenerate in me, wants to get involved. What are you thinking here with the Bulls and the Yellow Jackets?
Yeah, I'm with you. Last year these two teams played. Georgia Tech came in as a favorite. I think South Florida ran 2 kickoffs back for touchdowns in that game, and I'm forgetting the guy's name, but I think he got injured in that game later on, and South Florida lost him for the season, which was a big component to South Florida's explosiveness. But they did, as an underdog, upset Georgia Tech last season, 49-38. It's a totally different look Georgia Tech team. USF has one game of game film to go on. That game happens to be Georgia Tech getting destroyed by Clemson. Clemson did whatever they wanted to in that game. I'd say there probably wasn't a more disappointed fan base in week one than the South Florida fan base was with that 49-0 loss to Wisconsin. I almost see them bouncing back here and playing better against this Georgia Tech squad. I think it's going to take longer for Georgia Tech to get going. But, boy, since that 7-0 start last year, South Florida has just been straight downhill. It's kind of one of those where you have to hold your nose. Maybe you can get a totals play out of this. The only way I would look is over because I'm not a fan of either defense. But I'm not rushing to the window for anything on that game right now.
Robbie, good stuff as always. Anything else you want to throw out there before we move on to mid-major Matt breaking down the rest of the card?
You know what? Just the 5% NFL play up and available right now. There will be a 5% college football play this weekend as well. There's a couple of spots we really, really like. Going to narrow it down. Plays will be up by Friday morning. So I want you to be on the lookout for that for sure. College 5% last year, absolutely outstanding. And for the last 11 years, been the same. So that's something to look out for sure.
All right, showing no signs of stopping. He's Robbie Veno. Rob, thanks for the time, guys. We'll be back tomorrow breaking down the next segment with Mid-Major Matt and Joe Ranieri on the College Football Every Game on the Board podcast. Best of luck with your bets, and we'll talk tomorrow.